So from the health department to national security, we're already seeing that the prospect of a Biden administration would bring it with it major changes to U.S. policy. To help us better understand the differences when it comes to an economic outlook is Dan Eberhart. He's the best-selling author of the books The Switch and Switching Gears, as well as the CEO of energy services provider Canary. So Dan, when we look at the economy right now, we're in this transition period where we may be looking at a potential Biden administration bringing with it its own personnel, its own outlook when it comes to the economy. So I guess at first we should lay out the groundwork. How is the U.S. economy performing as of right now?
Well, luckily, before the pandemic, we had a really strong economy, and I think that the fundamentals are actually pretty strong. But we've still got 10 million more people out of work, and I also am worried, increasingly worried about the national debt. We've added 3 trillion to the national debt this year. It sits at 27 trillion, so I think we've got to be cautious about adding too much more.
And, I want to touch on some of the personnel. For example, I think maybe
Sure.
Janet Yellen is someone that we should start with when you bring up the national debt, for example, because in the past, she's someone that seems to put an emphasis more so on maybe productivity, getting people to work. At least that was what she was saying coming out of the 2008 recession, and not too much of an emphasis when it comes to the national debt or spending anything like that. So when you look at Janet Yellen, what do you think she could bring as Treasury Secretary?
I think she's a steady hand, and this is definitely a job switch, being the head of the Federal Reserve to being the head of the Treasury. But I look for her to have economic policies that center around redistribution and around getting people to work. And I think they're likely to be inflationary, to make asset values, lose value relative to inflation. And I also think that we're really going to be in a situation where the economy is going to we're going to spend a little bit too much, based on what some of the things that Yellen has said, her past actions, and then what Biden has said generally. I really worry that we're about to spend more than we have by a lot, to be honest.
And that is something, too, that a lot of people were voicing concerns about, of course, during the primary, but also the general election, is that a lot of times with these Democratic candidates, they bring with them these really ambitious proposals, but those proposals oftentimes bring with them a very expansive price tag as well, whether it be the Green New Deal, Medicare for All. That's traditionally what takes place. But I think that when we look at the people who could be running the Biden economic outlook as well, Brian Deese, for example, he was named the head of the National Economic Council. He's someone who was pivotal, for example, in the automotive buyout under President Barack Obama, but also crafting the Paris Climate Accord as well. So when you look at what they're putting together, do you have maybe concerns that there might be too much of an emphasis on climate or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think you got to realize that when people talk about redistributing wealth, when they talk about increased healthcare, when they talk about climate change, all these things cost money. So they're basically, you should hear after those words, you should hear tax increase or increase in the debt behind it. And frankly, I think that the Biden administration wants too much, and they're going to have to tone back a lot of their rhetoric and a lot of their promises. They're just not going to be able to come through on because we simply can't afford it. The national debt, since at 27 trillion, we've added 3 trillion to it this year. At some point, we've got to pump the brakes. We've got to stop, and we've got to be a bit more responsible. And Biden seems to just be trying to run away in the other direction, if you believe, half of his rhetoric.
Now, do you think that the Democratic Party in its entirety is running away from the idea of a national deficit? Because I remember during the primary, some economist, Stephanie Keaton, who I believe served for Bernie Sanders' campaign, she has this monetary theory where essentially the deficit doesn't matter. As long as it's helping with growth in the United States, giving people health care, for example, they kind of are taking this approach that the deficit does not matter. But you are saying that it does. Could you explain why that is?
Absolutely, I think it does. Look, every year you have got an increasing amount of the national budget, which is somewhere, just over $2 trillion this year. A certain percentage of that goes to interest payments. And every time we spend more for the debt, the cost we pay for interest goes up, and the percentage of the annual budget that has to go for the debt goes up. So, look, I'm kind of an old school Dick Armey Republican. I think we've got to watch what the federal government is doing, watch what the spending is. And look, this virus created a massive catastrophe economically for the country. We needed to get out in front of it. We needed to have stimulus. Republicans and Democrats worked together. But the second stimulus, I think, hasn't happened for a reason. And I think the reason is Republicans show more fiscal constraint and are more worried about the deficit and are more worried about debt. Every time we don't spend money, we don't borrow additional money, I think we're helping our kids, we're helping our grandkids, we're helping the future generation. We shouldn't have all the benefit from the spending and put increasing amount of debt on the next 2 generations. To me, that's just irresponsible, and that's what Biden has basically promised to do in his rhetoric. So it's very concerning to me.
And when we talk about the prospect of perhaps another stimulus package and more relief, whatever it may be, a lot of people are saying that, we need to open up the economy first to make sure that that money isn't just going to Amazon, for example, or Walmart, the people who are open, who are deemed essential. That's where a lot of that money ended up going when people got those $1,200 checks. So do you think that's the right strategy? We need to open up small businesses, make sure that they can get some of that stimulus?
Oh, absolutely. If we're going to have stimulus, I think it needs to go to small companies, including companies that are, really in the bottom third of who the PPP targeted earlier this year. We've got to look at the restaurants, the small retailers, the small service companies, and we've got to make sure those folks have burned. Look, it's been an extraordinary year for everybody, one for the record books, but those kind of companies have burned through their working capital. Families have burned through their savings trying to keep small businesses open. We've got to give those people a little bit of a push so they can continue to be out there and continue to operate and have, be open for dinner, be open to sell us stuff, be open to help us fix something. But we've got to be very, very constrained about what we do. It's got to be very targeted, and we've got to not have the waste and abuse that happened in some of the past programs. And the most important thing to me is that we're focused on economic growth. We're focused on bringing jobs back. If I could talk about the Green New Deal for a bit and some of the climate aspirational stuff.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The Biden administration, a lot of their goals surrounding climate and the Green New Deal really are things that cost too much money. I think we can't afford right now. To go back to your earlier point, I think we need to be focused on small businesses and restaurants, not on spending money on things in the Green New Deal and aspirational climate stuff that we really just can't afford right now. I think we need to be headed in that direction. The environment's important. Everybody wants clean water. Everybody wants clean air, but it's a matter of how much are we willing to pay for it. And I think that those resources could be better directed towards, bringing jobs back in Main Street America right now.
Yeah, and it's a hard sell to a lot of people who are out of work right now, telling them that perhaps their jobs shouldn't come back in furtherance of those aspirations that you're talking about. I think that there's an immediacy right now for a lot of working class people. And when it comes to those type of aspirations, such as the Green New Deal, I think a lot of that also depends on if Republicans can hold on to the Senate, because that could change a lot of things for them too. But Dan Eberhart, I appreciate you coming on the program tonight, breaking down the economic outlook. Thank you.